The video talked about how we trade and how we constantly, with everything that we have, whether where we're working, with the resources that we have an opportunity, whether or not we choose to trade those in and use those for our own comforts and our own satisfaction, or if we choose to turn around and trade those things for things that God has called us to where we are with where we are at. I think it's really cool that the kids in the church are doing, 2 mites. They're offering what little they have, asking if their friends in the cafeterias at school can offer up their trash for a purpose that's going to bring in 2 cents a pouch, and we're going to turn around and use that to help out at Boys and Girls Club. Chance to be honest here, I love what we do. I love the free flowing that we have in our service. But let me also be honest and tell you, it is hard for me at times, for my kids to be in the service at times, because my kids are such a distraction for me, that I'm always watching them and thinking, yeah, and I get so stressed out as I'm watching them, thinking, stop. And then God kind of steps in and he says, remember the children. Remember the children, that they are as loved by God and as important to God as I am. And that when you invite kids and families into the mix of what God is doing, it's not going to go smoothly. It's not going to go quietly. It's not going to go orderly, that it's going to be a distraction. And so it was a reminder for me, because as I talk this morning, I want to talk about seeking. I want to continue that message of what it looks like to discover, because oftentimes what we do in the church, we do it, I think, and it's a hindrance to us, where we want things to be comfortable. We want things to be predictable. We want things to be ordinary. We want things to just kind of roll and to know what to expect when we show up. And when things don't do that, then we start getting uncomfortable, just like Stuart is right now, because I'm standing right over his shoulder. Right? And so we do that, then we expect that with church, and we want that from church, and then we start to project that on God. That we want God to show up in our life and to be predictable. We want him to show up where we expect God to be. And so we stop looking for God, except for in the places where we've put our blinders on and said, this is where God is going to move, and this is where God is going to act, and this is how God is going to behave, and this is what God is going to do, because these are the things that I expect of God, and I have just made God in my image. And so something as simple as the preacher man walking around among us, within touch of us, makes us uncomfortable. And if we can't handle a preacher man walking around at the church service, how much more comfortable or uncomfortable are we going to be with God moving and working and doing whatever it is that he has to be doing in the world? Can we handle it? See, we often put God on a leash. We say God can only do these things, and God can only work in these ways, and God can only operate in the ways that I expect him. But in reality, we are not tethered to God, and God is certainly not tethered to us. And so we've got to continually keep our eyes open where we can seek and see where God is moving. Jesus often said, he said, those who have ears, let them hear. And he's not saying just simply, hey, if you got these flappy pieces of skin on the side of your head, then listen to what I'm saying. No, he's saying at that much deeper level. I talked last week about how Jesus had this hidden gospel message where he constantly told people, don't tell people about this. Don't share about the miracle that I just did. Don't tell people these things. And part of that was that he didn't want celebrity status. He didn't want to be just confined to being a faith healer or this miracle worker. But he knew that that darkness just like the song said, that darkness clouds light. It wraps itself in light. And so Jesus is saying, listen, if you really want to hear the echoes and the whispers of the small voice, you want to hear the call of my kingdom, you want to hear the call of my story and the redemption plan that I'm doing out in this world, then you got to hear it. Not just what's being said, but the message that's underneath. That's why Jesus taught in parables, because he wasn't laying it out in a 3-point sermon saying, here's what you do in the spiritual life. Here's how you follow in an obedient. Here it is, 10 easy steps. Now go and go do that. And once you've done those 10 easy steps, congratulations, you'll get your certificate and you'll move on. And now you'll be able to go to big boy church and big girl church and you'll be a super Christian. Jesus knew that was not the way, and yet that's often what we tend to do with our faith and our religion, is we reduce it to a set of principles and priorities, and we put it out there on a list, and we say, if you do these things, well, then you're doing really good in our camp as far as what we think it means to be a Christian. And so if you read through the latter part of Matthew in the Gospels, he's talking a lot about religion and about the Jewish faith. And he talks to the Pharisees and he says, you pile up so much stuff that you present yourself as these whitewashed graves, that you're this clean place of death on the inside. And we do that in our lives. We present ourselves as holy or as faithful or as pious or as obedient or hey, I'm there all the time. I'm a part of everything. And in reality, inside, there's just a rotting corpse. And Jesus calls to us and he's saying, wake up, come out, be alive. But we got to untether God. See, to be a Jewish, they evangelized in the Jewish faith. They proselytized. They wanted people to be a part of the Jewish faith. And in order to do that, you had to do 3 things. As you were studying to be obedient in the faith, you had to do 3 things. First, you had to get baptized. That was a Jewish practice. If you were outside of the Jewish faith, and the Jewish heritage and the family tree, in order to be in it, you had to get baptized. So it's weird when we think about what John's doing out in the wilderness where he's baptizing people. Well, he's baptizing Jewish people. Jewish people don't get baptized. Un-Jewish people who are trying to be Jewish people get baptized. Second, you had to get circumcised. People aren't lining up for this, okay? When the church steps out and says, hey, welcome, be a member of our church. We want to dip you in water. Great, no problem. We'll go through a class and do that, and we'll show up and we'll get dunked in the lake. Awesome. And then we're going to do circumcision. I'm busy that day. Circumcision. And then the third part was you had to offer a sacrifice in the temple. Those are the 3 things you had to move from outside of the Jewish faith into the Jewish practice. And then the Pharisees, in an attempt to want to create this holy nation, that they believed that if for a 24-hour period, if we were faithful, if the Jewish people were faithful for a 24-hour period, then the Messiah would show up and would lead Israel to rule over all the other nations, to conquer them, to put them under subjugation, so that things would be in the right order as they saw it. And so the Pharisees, in good faith, mind you, with good intentions, what we talked about last week, they wanted to do a good thing, but the good thing wasn't necessarily the right thing. And so the Pharisees stepped up and they kind of kept adding interpretations to the law where if you were going to be good and if you were going to be faithful, then you had to do and you had to act and you had to be this way. And Jesus steps on the scene and he says, and you just pile up all these rules for your believers and for people that are outside the faith to hear all these rules, and this burden becomes so heavy. And Jesus steps on the scene and he says, but my yoke is light. My teachings are simple. See, we often make all these areas of red tape that people have to get to in order to get to God. If they want to get to God, they got to get through us, and they got to get through our rules. They got to come to church, the church building regularly. That they got to come through a class, or they got to be involved in this way, or big one is they've got to give money to the church. We have a story in the Old Testament. This is the story of Naaman. It was a king in 2 Kings. He's the king of the Syrians. The Bible calls him the king of the land of Arab. And he has gone up and he's had war against Israel, and he's conquered them, and they have brought back to their camp, they've brought back slaves. Now here's the thing about Naaman. Naaman has leprosy. His body is covered with leprosy, and he was this great military commander. Nations feared him. And the slave girl works in or near the temple, and she says, there's a man back where I'm from who could heal you if you go to him. And for whatever reason, the king decides to listen to this little slave girl. And so he sends his entourage back to Israel to go visit the prophet Elisha. And so his entourage comes up to the house of Elijah. I don't know how big this entourage is or what it is, but we know that the king is not there. He sends a group for him. And Elisha sends his servant out there to greet them. And he greets them, and they share the story of what's going on. And they say, ask this healer, ask him what we should do, what the king should do. And Elisha prays to God, and God says, tell him to go wash in the Jordan River 7 times. God likes to do things in groups of 3s and 7s because repetition counts. 3 or 7 times, actually. So he says, the servant comes out and he says, go tell your king to go wash in the Jordan River. And the Jordan River is a dirty river. Okay, it's got deep soil deposits, and it just is a muddy river. It's like the Mississippi River. It's ugly. You don't want to swim in the Mississippi River because it just looks gross, and you don't know what's lurking around underneath, out of sight, that's going to grab your toes. Okay, it is not the place where you want to go. And so his servant comes out and he says, "Go tell your king to go wash in the river 7 times." And so they travel back to the king. They say, he says, go dip yourselves in the river 7 times and you'll be healed. And he says, what? No, I'm not, that river is nasty. It is gross. I'm a king. We have better rivers up here. Go tell him I've got clean water here. I will dip myself in it and allow God to heal me there. And his advisors step back and they say, if he would have asked you to do something great, if he would have told you to conquer a nation, if he would have told you to give away money or resources, you would have done those things. But he didn't ask you to do something great. He asked you to do something simple. So the king does the first thing in obedience when it comes to grace is he lays down what probably was his dignity and his pride and his need to be in control and to be able to predict how this healing should come. And of course, prepares himself and he steps in. And as he comes out the 7 times, Scripture says that his skin comes out like a baby's skin. And of course, the king is elated. So Naaman heads back. And we have in the story that he goes with his entourage. He goes to the house of Elisha, and he comes back, he says, I've brought you wealth. The things that I've pillaged, I want to give them to you as a gift for doing this to me. And what does Elisha do? Elisha comes out and he says, I don't want your gift. It wasn't me. I didn't do this. I didn't give you the healing. I can't do those things. And then Naaman does what all of us do. As soon as God blesses us, we'll be faithful. Well, because you've done that, God, I'm going to pray more. I'm going to be at church every week. In fact, I'm just going to get involved. I'm going to do these things for you, God, because you've been good to me. Right? All right? And then something bad happens. We're like, oh, God, thought we were on a thing here. thought I was going to do things for you and you were going to do things for me. Isn't that how this works? So Naaman shows up and he says, I want to give you these things. And Elisha says, no, it's not me. Keep your stuff. So then he does what we all do, right? Even if God kind of disappoints, he says, okay, well then I want more. He says, then and he goes real grand here. He's like, then give me your dirt. Give me your dirt. I want dirt from this land so I can take it home, because surely the God that you worship is alive and well in this land, because gods were tied to areas geographically. And Naaman says, give me your dirt so I can take this dirt home and I can worship the God that is here, that you worship. And so Elijah says, you can have the dirt. God's not in the dirt. Go for it. Spiritual poverty. It's one phrase that's used one time in Scripture. Jesus uses it when he starts the greatest sermon on earth, the Sermon on the Mount. He says, blessed are those who are poor in spirit. See, it's different in Luke. Luke gives a different version of the sermon, but Luke says, blessed are those who are poor. And in fact, in some translations today, they even take away the in spirit part. They say things like, blessed are those who are poor and realize their need for God. That kind of weakens it. The Message takes it, I think, really far, because the Message says, blessed are those who are at the end of their rope, which God is there. When you're at the end of the rope, when you think you're just hanging on by a thread and you think, I don't know what to do, God is there with you. He's not there holding his hand out ready to catch you. God's actually there hanging on the thread, just saying, hey, I'm right here. Hello. If you have ears, I'm right here. Matthew says those who are poor in spirit. See, there's two types of poverty in the world. There is abject poverty, poverty that things like this and World Vision in this Christmas catalog, what real poverty looks like. See, we think, well, you filed for bankruptcy, you're poor. Well, bankruptcy comes from bad circumstances in the economy around you, or from irresponsibility by our own management of feet. But real poverty comes from, look, I got nothing. I got nothing. And in the same way, poor in spirit reflects that same kind of poverty when we come to that place in our life where we realize, man, I got nothing. And nothing I have or nothing I do is because of anything that I have. But it's been given to me. I'm able to go and have a job and provide for my family and do these things for them, not because of my own. Yeah, I'm smart and yeah, I'm gifted, and yeah, I have these things, but I know poor and I know smart and gifted people that don't have a job. Makes it any different. See, it's poor in spirit. You just realize that you're just an empty vessel. That you can't create your own blessings. That you can't create the stuff that you have in your life. Now, we confuse ourselves because we pretend that we can, right? We often do. We often convince ourselves, well, I can do this. I can pull myself up by my bootstraps. I can get out there and do this thing, and I will make this thing for myself. And you can do that. But it doesn't make you rich in spirit. See, the other beautiful thing about this phrase, is poor in spirit, is it takes away all the labels in the world. Because when Jesus says poor in spirit, well, that could mean the Jews. He could be talking to the Pharisees who are trying to hold up this pious, obedient, deeded out faith. Or he could be talking about the people of the land, the people that didn't live around Jerusalem, who stayed away from the religious scene of Jerusalem because the laws were so oppressive. There was so much. How can you do this? So he could be talking about the people that are outside of that inner circle of faith. Or he could be talking to people who have no part in the Jewish faith. And I think it's a good thing for us. It'd be a great thing for us as people of faith to be able to say, look, we're just poor in spirit. We're as poor in spirit as anyone else in the world has the opportunity to be poor in spirit. Brennan Manning wrote a book on it called Ragamuffin Gospel. Julie, you're reading this, right? Reading a little bit, flipping through it. Lays it out really well, what that looks like, of what poor in spirit is, and what it can be, and what it should become. See, it's a different posture. I talked about this before, where I grew up in a world and a faith where evangelism was kind of became this. Gosh, it was. I don't like to say it because it just tastes yucky saying it, right? But evangelism means someone sent with a message. And if we can break it down really simply, like we like to do, how great is our God should be the message that our life exemplifies in all that we do, in our workplace, in our family life, in our finances, in our relationships, as a church. Everything that we do should be how great our God is. And then when people see that and come in contact with us, and when we live that disciplined life and that disciplined faith, they say, well, why do you do that? And I do this because my God is so great. He heals people by having them dip themselves in a dirty river 7 times. And he's not in the dirt. That we can send out a blast of a stranger that we don't know whose house unfortunately burns down. And we just say, hey, we've heard this story of tragedy that's happened in the world, and if anybody can help. And people then start calling and flooding us with clothes and gifts and toys and things that family's going to need to put some normalcy back into their life. And we say, hey, there's kids that need food in their bellies, and we start filling up the cart from week to week. Why? Not because we have great grocery stores, but because our God is great. And we've seen the story, and we've experienced this story in our own lives, where God has stepped in some way in your life and redeemed something. And here's where it came. Look at your life and look where where the biggest moments of your life and your faith with God has been. And it has not been because of a great sermon you heard on Sunday morning, unfortunately. Has it? Right? Nobody be like, oh my gosh, the message. No. When God has stepped in and worked in your life and given you that milestone, that Ebenezer, boom, that stone in the ground in your life where you look back and you say, it was that moment, it was that time, it was that episode, it was that environment. It was something when something big was going on in your life. Big tragedy, big blessing, big transition, big change. Why? Because you are put in a place of discomfort. God works and moves through our lives when we put ourselves in an atmosphere of discomfort. And the video talks about we put ourselves in this American dream where we have luxuries and we can shell ourselves off from the world and we can stay hidden and blind and ignorant to everything that's going on, and we stay comfortable, and God will not move in the comfortable. And God says, step in to the unknown. Go on this journey with me where you don't know where you're going, where you don't know where the end is, where you're not in control. And the best way we can do that is with this mentality of being poor in spirit, that we are as poor and should be more poor than anyone else that we join in conversation. And as we share that message of how great is our God, it's not from a place where we present it and we have all the right answers and we have all the right ways. And if you'll just follow this plan that my church has put together and go to these classes, then, hey, you'll be good to go. but where we show up and we say, hey, what's your story? What's going on in your life? Where are you hurting? Where are you questioning? Where are you in transition, good or bad? And we choose to walk alongside other people, and we allow them to walk alongside us in our own life, not putting up a front of how good we are because we walk with God, but how broken we are and how God provides everything that we have. It becomes a whole different approach and posture to people in the world. Paul gives us a scripture, and I'm going to read it out of the Message because I like how it's spoken there. It's in Romans chapter 3. And it's actually Paul quoting scripture that actually comes from Psalms in the Old Testament. It says this, it says, Scripture leaves no doubt about it. There's nobody living right, not even one. Nobody who knows the score. Nobody alert for God. They've all taken the wrong turn. They've all wandered down blind alleys. No one's living right. I can't find one single person. Their throats are gaping open like graves, and their tongues are as slick as mudslides. And every word that they speak is tinged with poison, and they open their mouths and they pollute the air. They race for the honor of Sinner of the Year, and they litter the land with heartbreak and ruin. And they don't know the first thing about living with others. And they never give God the time of day. And this makes it clear, doesn't it, that whatever is written in these scriptures is not what God says about others, but it's what God says to us, to whom the scriptures were addressed in the first place. And it's clear enough, isn't it, that we are sinners, every one of us, in the same seeking boat with everybody else, and our involvement with God's revelation doesn't put us right with God. What it does is force us to face our own complicity in everyone else's sin. And the only knowledge and the promise that we have as we come to that realization and to that truth is that although the lightness is shrouded in dark, we have caught at least a spark of it. And we can proclaim how great is our God. David, I'm going to ask, can you close us out in that song? David comes up and gets ready, and they get ready so that we can close out in that anthem and that prayer. Would you please stand and join me? Make this your time in prayer. Maybe you need to admit it. I am a sinner. What I have is not mine, that I've not done on my own merit or my own hard work or my own favor. Maybe you need to confess, God, I box you in, that I allow you to only work in the comfortable areas of my life. Whatever it is, this is your time to pray.